must be prepared to kill people, as in war. You must be prepared to send people to their deaths, as in our own soldiers during war. Now maybe you will gloss this over by saying this is the lesser evil, and therefore better to send those troops ashore at Normandy in 1944 if you're Franklin Roosevelt. Better that than that Adolf Hitler should control all of Europe and inflict much greater evil. Okay, you can say that it is the lesser of evil, but don't kid yourself and say that it's a good thing. Don't kid yourself and say that it's not an evil. It is an evil, and unless you're willing to do that, don't apply for the job. Now, this might be the extreme case, but there are times when what the French call raison d'etat, the reasons of state, have to take precedence over your personal conscience. Sometimes, when I'm being kind of half serious, half flippant, I'll say that successful presidents have to know when and how to rise above principle. Because in a democracy, you don't get to make the decisions yourself. You have to recognize that other people have a right to their views, and success in a democracy requires the ability of pulling together enough of various people's views to get something done. Okay, I will stop there. I've really spoken longer than I was supposed to, but if you have any questions, I'd be delighted to try to answer them. Yes, sir. You got your hand up first.
I loved your Teddy Roosevelt book.
Thank you.
The many. And I see parallels between his presidency and the issues that we are dealing with today. So I was wondering if you'd be so kind of speculate on how Teddy would have dealt with some of the issues today.
The first thing I have to tell you is that it's very difficult to project confidently from more than just a decade or two in the past to the present. Simply because, and actually this was the focus of a talk that I gave this morning, success in politics, success in democratic politics, requires a fit between the individual and the times. Theodore Roosevelt suited his times very well. Would Theodore Roosevelt have suited our times? Hard to say. John McCain hopes so. John McCain is modeling himself after Teddy Roosevelt, and for good reason. Teddy Roosevelt is among the most popular Republican presidents. He was known as a maverick, and John McCain sees himself that way. But one of the things I can't tell you is what position Theodore Roosevelt would have taken on important issues today. Because I can't tell you if Theodore Roosevelt today would be a liberal or a conservative. And by this I mean, would he have advocated a stronger role for government, let's say in health care reform? Would he have advocated a stauncher role for the United States in Iraq? He was strong on defense, but he never sent American troops into battle when he was president. He praised the virtues of war when he wasn't president. He joined the Army for his generation's controversial war, the Spanish-American War, but when he was president it was a different matter. And when I say that I can't tell if Roosevelt would be a liberal or a conservative, I can tell you that Roosevelt was a liberal by the standards of his day. He believed that government was too small in his day to deal with the issues confronting the American people. But that was at a time when the federal government was probably 1/10 the size it is today. So would Theodore Roosevelt always have favored bigger government? I don't know. Would he have thought that maybe halfway between where it was then and where it is now was the optimal size? At which point he would have said no bigger than this. I don't know. I can tell you, and so you might think, well, what's the point in studying past presidents? I can tell you, though, that there's certain leadership styles, there's certain characteristics, certain personal traits that do translate a bit. Theodore Roosevelt, when I sort of mapped out in my head what I was going to say this evening, I thought I'd get to Theodore Roosevelt and talk about the importance of enemies. I told you about Jackson and Nicholas Biddle. Theodore Roosevelt took on his enemy, J.P. Morgan. Morgan was the great financier of his day. Morgan was, really there's no equivalent to Morgan today, because there was no individual who personifies big capital, big money. But Roosevelt went out of his way to pick a fight with J.P. Morgan. And as soon as he became president, he attacked Morgan's latest merger initiative. Some railroad conglomerate called Northern Securities took it on and forced its breakup, in part to demonstrate what Jackson was trying to demonstrate with Nicholas Biddle, that in this country democracy rules. The capitalists don't run the show, the people run the show. So that's one aspect of Theodore Roosevelt that would probably still exist. Theodore Roosevelt was one who did believe that when American troops were committed to battle, then they ought to fight it out to a successful finish. See, if Theodore Roosevelt inherited the war in Iraq, then I'm going to guess he would have taken a position very much like John McCain is taking. And as McCain, perhaps, if he's elected, will inherit. Would Roosevelt have sent the American troops into Iraq in the first place? I don't know. It never occurred to anybody in the United States to send, in 1901 or 1908, to send troops into battle in the Middle East. Frankly, it never occurred to any president of the United States to do such a thing until, I guess it was, January 1991. So this is American foreign policy, American domestic policy has changed so dramatically since those days that you can isolate a certain mindset and approach, but what they would actually do is much harder to say. Yes, yes, sir.
Didn't Roosevelt send troops to Tripoli? I kind of have to disagree with you there. He sent troops specifically to into a foreign nation. It didn't happen to be the Middle East, but it was awful darn close.
Now, Roosevelt was the one who sent the ultimatum to Raisuli.
Right.
I didn't send troops there, but he sent the ultimatum.
Maybe I saw the movie wrong, but maybe I'm all wet on this movie. But he did send troops. It's just a small contingent, but he didn't.
Now, he didn't land troops in Morocco or in North Africa. It was Thomas Jefferson who sent troops into the Barbary States. Yeah, Brian?
Well, speaking of Jefferson, Jefferson was a strict constructionist who, as president, vastly overstepped his constitutional boundaries. Purchased Louisiana. Would you include loyalty to ideas in the concept?
There is a remarkable fact of, what shall we call it, the change that comes across people's philosophies of government once they get elected president. Until they're president, as long as they're on the outside, there are a lot of people who think that government is too big. And those people running government simply ought to back off. And they ought to trust the American people. They ought to trust the judgment of the American people. They ought to trust the American people to hang on to their own money. After all, as Ronald Reagan used to say, it's their money. It's not the government's money. Thomas Jefferson fell into that category. Jefferson was a strict constructionist. Jefferson famously said that government governs best which governs least. And as long as he wasn't president, as long as he wasn't the government, it seemed to hold together philosophically and politically. But then he became president. And in Jefferson's defense, the real test of this strict construction philosophy came when he was offered, the bargain of a lifetime. When he was offered the opportunity to purchase the Louisiana Territory. Now, Jefferson is a strict constructionist, looked at his Constitution, and he tried to find under the powers granted to Congress, under the powers granted to the presidency, the right to purchase foreign territory. And he looked in there, and if you look into your Constitution too, you're not going to find a word about that. So he thought about, well, maybe we should try to find an amendment. We should write an amendment to the Constitution. But he read his Constitution again, and he realized amending the Constitution is devilishly difficult. You got to get 2/3 of each house, and you got to get 3/4 of the states. And he knew he had enough political enemies that people would try to frustrate him, even if they agreed that it was a good idea. So he simply decided, ignore the matter. Oh, and here the problem too was the perceived volatility of Napoleon, who was the ruler of France at the time, who had proposed this deal. When Napoleon wanted to get rid of Louisiana, wanted to raise some cash. Americans can have this for $15 million. So where's Jefferson going to get the money? He's going to have to go to Congress. Congress is going to have to approve the deal. And so Jefferson decided that, he'd ignore these problems of unconstitutionality, and he would submit the bill to Congress for the money, and Congress, if it voted in favor of the money, presumably would approve the measure.